Outside of just pretty dolls, the American Girl doll line intertwines rich history into many of the original, now retired dolls. So today, I want to go over the complete original lore of the adorable twin-braided doll who lived on the home front during World War II, Molly McIntire. I'm going to focus on just the first main 6 books of Molly's central series, because most of the new ones are released by different authors. 10-year-old Molly McIntire lives in her house alongside her mother, older sister Jill, mischievous younger brothers Brad and Ricky, and her housekeeper, Mrs. Guilford. In the first book, it's noted that she has 2 cats named Bessie and May, but they only get brought up once in this first book, and later on when Molly gets her dog Bennett, they aren't mentioned either. Molly lives in the time of the 1940s during the Second World War. During this war, Molly's father is out on the field serving as a doctor in England, while Molly's mother spends most of her day out working at the Red Cross quarters. Even Miss Guilford keeps her and the children of the house at work in order to help the war effort by farming, in order to avoid spending money on canned goods so that the soldiers could have them instead. In every book in the series, we see how different characters react to the war and how they cope and adapt to the world around them. Molly heavily emphasizes in her story how much her life has changed in every aspect. In the first book of the series, Meet Molly, we see how the variety and amount of food and supplies aren't as available as they were before. When Molly notices that her rubber boots don't fit anymore, she is forced to wear her brother's instead. This is because of how most resources began to support the war and soldiers rather than daily living luxuries. Even at Halloween time, due to a lack of sugar in the general market, Molly received apples, peanuts, and donuts, instead of the standard candy and cookies Molly usually received. These aspects do reflect on how real families and people were affected by the war in just their daily lives. Molly learns to apply elements of war into her daily life in every book of the main series. It is in the first book that she learns about revenge and allyship. We see this when Molly goes to war with her cheeky brother as they play a mean set of tricks on one another. But this war eventually gets broken up by their mother. In this, she lectures them saying that enough hatred is in the world, and revenge is how most wars start. This sensitivity to claiming war, even when it's just a children's game, had a bigger impact during the time of a world war. And even though this book is fiction, I'm sure that many mothers during this time gave this same speech to their children. In book 2 of the series, we see Molly forced to become allies with Allison, one of Molly's classmates. Allison is seen a couple of times throughout the series and is usually seen as an antagonist. Allison is an only child to 2 very wealthy parents. And while she tries not to brag about her life, she accidentally does so by default, leaving many classmates and Molly to hate her. Molly's class is asked to help out with the war effort. All of the girls in the class agree to knit socks for the soldiers, all besides Molly. In secret, Molly and her 2 friends, Linda and Susan, create an alliance where they begin to ditch the socks idea and instead collect bottle caps. When both groups of girls knitting socks and Molly and her friends end up spare, they decide to unite forces to create the idea of making one gigantic blanket. In their alliance with all of the girls together, they are more successful in finding bottle caps as well. In the end, their final project was 1 knitted blanket and 100 bottle tops, which landed them a spot in the newspaper at the end of the book. We'll go over the historical relevancy of that later. In Molly's 3rd book, Molly's Surprise, we see a sadder look at the reality of families who are away from their families during a time of war. The Christmas story focuses on Molly and her family dynamic more heavily as we learn more about Molly's 14-year-old sister Jill. Jill, throughout the other books, and even this one, is often dismissive and often makes herself seem more mature in order to cope with the world around her. In this Christmas story, she and Molly share the concerns for their father's Christmas packages not showing up in the mail and fear that Christmas and/or the family might have a loss on their hands. But Molly and Jill are forced to team up together as they find the package for the family the next snowy morning outside their house, with specific instructions to keep tucked away till Christmas. Both sisters work together again to surprise their family on Christmas morning with all the presents their father had left for them. This book is where we see things get more emotional for characters in the series, but I think the most emotional book, with the biggest references to detrimental historical events, is in the 4th book of the series called Happy Birthday, Molly. This book is also pretty interesting because it introduces a character who we will later see in the best friend line for American Girl doll with Emily Bennett. Happy Birthday, Molly highlights how Western allies of the war were affected, specifically through Emily, a British girl who was sent to America to live with Molly for a period of time. Emily came to live with Molly in order to run away from the Blitz, which was a series of bombings London faced during World War II. But when Emily arrives to America, she finds out that her aunt has pneumonia, forcing her to stay with the McIntires. It's never really explained how the McIntires found out about Emily and decided to take her in, but regardless, Emily comes to live with them for a short period of time. Emily is probably the most traumatized character we meet throughout this book. The book points out how England has been in a war longer than America. When Emily first meets Molly, Molly invites her to play in her makeshift bomb shelter, which she made to play pretend. This introduction disturbs Emily, creating a small rift between these two characters at the beginning of the story. It's not until after a practice blackout made to prepare Americans in case of bombings that Emily cries and shares her experiences from protecting herself from bombs in England. In one quote she shares, "But it was almost worse afterwards, coming out again. A house she'd walk by every day would be nothing but a pile of stones. Sometimes the flowers would even still be growing along the path, and the path would lead to nothing." After this, Molly and Emily connect more as they both reminisce on how they miss a part of their family. Emily even shares with Molly how she lost her pet due to the bombings. It's at the end of this book that Molly's dog Bennett is introduced, and is revealed to be named after Emily's last name. Emily also receives her own dog in this book named Yank, in order to lift her spirits about the passing of her own dog. In the last two books of the series, we see the timeline of World War II fold out as Molly uses what she saw on the news from the D-Day invasion as inspiration to sneak up on a red team in a heated game of capture the flag at Camp Gowanagin. This book also points out how many children at the time were often sent to summer camps to learn basic survival skills and to avoid traveling internationally during summer seasons. Lastly, the final book of the series, Changes for Molly, takes place near the end of the war, where Molly begins to notice how the world around her is getting back to the way it used to be, but at the same time still changing. She notes how stores have more products in them compared to at the beginning of the war, and how many families have been affected, and how many soldiers' lives have been risked or stolen. Molly's father sends a letter saying that he will be home soon, which sends Molly into excitement as she prepares for a show in her area that is performing a welcome back ceremony to thank soldiers from the war. To prepare for the show, she has Jill help her every night in putting her damp hair in curlers. Through this, Jill and Molly are able to connect once more again as they reminisce of how the war has affected their own lives. Molly is casted to be a big star in this welcome ceremony show, but on the day of the performance, Molly ends up being sick because of how many times she went to bed with a wet head. While in bed, she receives mail from her father saying that his arrival will be delayed, making the day even worse for Molly. While she lay all alone, being disappointed not being able to perform in the big show, she is surprised to hear her father walk into the house where he engulfs her into a hug. And with that, the main series of the Molly McIntire story is completed, as she is reunited with her father again. In the doll of Molly herself, we see how American Girl doll tried to combine Molly's story with her many accessories. One accessory includes a silver locket with a photo insert of Mr. McIntire that can be placed inside. Another accessory that alludes to her father is a letter and envelope Molly sends to her father in book 2 of the series. But an accessory that I find the most interesting that speaks to Molly's story and the history around her is Molly's lucky steel penny. This is a reference to how during World War II, pennies were changed to be made of steel instead of copper, so that copper could be used for the war instead. Since they only made a handful of these steel pennies, they're considered pretty lucky and go for a high price today. Out of all the original girls, Molly has the biggest amount of best friends. Most girls in the series only have one best friend who get their own doll and book, which are introduced later on, like with Elizabeth, who is Felicity's best friend. But in most of Molly's books, she's hanging out with her two best friends, Linda and Susan, in most of the main series. 8 years after the main story is completed, Emily receives her own book along with her own doll in 2006 that would retire in 2014. Her accessories also include family memorabilia in reference to her story. It makes sense that Emily was introduced because I'm sure it would have been a hard decision to choose between Linda and Susan. The best friend line started in 2004, making Emily the third in the doll line to be best friend to one of the main girls. 3 seems to be Molly's lucky number because she was also third to get her own movie. What I find the most interesting about Molly's story as a whole is how it portrays how children are affected by war. Throughout all the books in the series, we see children being inspired by the events around them in order to create their own play pretend. But outside of that, something that I love about the American Girl doll books is that each historical book has a section at the end dedicated to teaching you about how, while this story is fiction, many of these events were based on real life. Even Molly's book about doing a school project about helping the war effort was based on a real group of girls who created one knitted blanket together. It's just something that makes the books feel more valuable, and that you know that you're learning about real history and knowing that this story wasn't lazily written or researched just to get some sales on doll figures. Molly's doll and story represent the children of America who were forced to make sacrifices and adapt to a time filled with change. She came out in 1986, which is only 41 years after World War II had ended. I'm sure that this doll helped a lot of children connect with family members who may have been around during this era, as this doll helped to open conversation of how America looked while soldiers went out to fight during the war. Her doll and character is considered to be the top 3 most popular of the original historical dolls, with her doll going for hundreds and thousands of dollars online. Whether it's just her cute vintage style or her story, she is generally adored by American Girl doll fans and collectors. Her character is one that highlights endurance and strength by living and adapting to difficult times in America. Her brown braids and glasses are known for being iconic to her character and to the American Girl doll brand today. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Sorry this took a minute to post. I was busy trying to read all of her books and then decide which ones I thought were important and which ones I thought were interesting. But anyways, I hope you guys have a good one. Bye!